Okay, let's talk about the letter Y. You see that shape constantly, right? It's everywhere.
Mhm.
But, stop and actually look at it for a second. What if there's more to it? Like a deeper secret?
Something beyond just its place in the alphabet.
Exactly. What if it's connected to something really fundamental, something in nature?
It's a really intriguing thought, moving past the sort of dry historical facts of how letters developed
Yeah.
and thinking more about how maybe natural patterns could uh, intuitively shape how we think symbolically on a much deeper level.
Right. And that's this, well, kind of wild idea we're digging into today. It's called the river confluence hypothesis for the letter Y. We've got this article that really lays it out.
Yeah, the source material describes this hypothesis.
Yeah.
And it's really important to state right off the bat, this is not the official, historically proven story of where Y came from.
Gotcha. Not the textbook answer.
No. It's more a symbolic and cognitive angle, a different way of looking at it.
Okay, so our aim here is to really unpack this hypothesis. See how things like nature, maybe sound, and how our brains work, how they might link up in surprising ways.
Even if it turns out this isn't the accepted history.
Right. It just makes you think differently about these shapes you see every single day and just take for granted. Okay, so let's get into it. What's the starting point in the article?
Well, it kicks off with something really visually obvious, the actual shape, the Y itself.
Which, I mean, yeah, it just looks like a river splitting, doesn't it? Or maybe merging.
Precisely. Merging is the key here. The hypothesis zeroes in on that river image. In hydrology, that Y shape is called a confluence.
The confluence.
Yeah, it's just the spot where two streams, or, two bodies of water, join up and become one bigger one.
Uh-huh.
And you see this pattern, well, all over the place in nature. River forks, obviously, little tributaries feeding into a bigger river.
Mm-hmm.
Even the paths melt water cars down the glacier.
And the article points out it's not just any shape, it's super common for water, right? Because it's often like the easiest path, the path of least resistance.
Exactly. It's a really fundamental geometry in how fluids move across landscapes.
Okay.
So it's this distinct recurring shape that, early humans living near water would have seen constantly, easily recognizable.
Okay, so that's the visual side. The Y shape is out there in nature, but this theory brings in sound too, which is interesting. How does that work?
Right, the auditory layer. The source suggests there might be a connection between this Y shape, this confluence, and the sounds water makes, specifically certain kinds of water sounds.
Like what kind of sounds?
Think about spring water bubbling up from the ground,
Mm-hmm.
or water rushing really fast through a narrow, rocky channel.
Oh, okay. Like a high-pitched gurgle or something, a splashing sound.
Yeah, that's the idea, high-pitched gurgling. The article even gets quite specific, suggesting these sort of proto-sounds, maybe onomatopoeia, that
Wow.
might mimic these sounds.
It mentioned yee, didn't it, for upward splashes. And something like yilgeel for bubbling.
That's right, yee and yilgeel. It's quite specific.
Yeah.
And these sounds are basically just, physics, fluid dynamics, how water and air bubbles and surface tension all interact.
Okay.
Now, the article's careful here. It points out there isn't, a direct scientific proof linking those specific water sounds to the modern sound, the phone J we use in yes.
Ah, okay. So it's not saying the sounds are identical, scientifically speaking.
Exactly. It's more about a potential resemblance, a similarity someone might perceive between those water sounds and sounds humans can make.
I see. So the idea is that similarity, maybe just a feeling of similarity, could have been enough for early people to connect them.
That's the core suggestion, yeah.
Yeah.
That the resemblance alone might have led early human minds to associate those kinds of vocal patterns with water, with flow, or with that idea of merging.
All right, this is fascinating. So we've got the visual Y from rivers, this possible sound link. How does this connect to humans, actually, like making symbols or developing language? This is where our brains come in, I guess.
Yes, exactly. This is the human cognitive piece. And cognitive science tells us our brains are pretty amazing at a few relevant things,
Like what?
like recognizing patterns in our surroundings, linking things we see with things we hear, and crucially, assigning symbolic meaning to forms or sounds that keep popping up.
So we're basically pattern matching, meaning making machines.
You could put it that way, yeah. And source ties this to another really interesting idea, the Odam theory.
Odam Teely, never heard of it. What is that?
The article explains it as a culturally rooted idea, a kind of traditional linguistic philosophy, mainly from Central Asia.
Okay.
And its main idea is that early human language, symbolic thought, It didn't disappear out of nowhere. It grew directly from observing, mimicking, and interpreting the natural world.
So like the sounds, the shapes, the processes in nature.
Exactly. It's this idea that language is fundamentally born from how we interact with nature.
So nature wasn't just like the scenery, it was the source code, the inspiration.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
It supports this notion that things like, I don't know, the sound of a waterfall or the shape of a tree branch or a river confluence,
Yeah.
these could have been the very first sparks for human sounds and the symbols they eventually created.
Okay, I think I'm getting it now. So you take the visual Y shape of the river confluence.
Uh-huh.
You add the potential connection to water, sounds like yay.
Right.
You factor in our brain's knack for linking sights and sounds and finding patterns.
Yes.
And then you layer on this Odam Tilly idea that language itself comes from observing nature.
Right. And the hypothesis suggests that all of that together could have led early humans to perceive, or maybe even consciously form, a symbol.
Hmm.
Maybe something like our Y, that basically captured both that visual shape and the associated sound experience they found in nature.
So the symbol becomes like a little map, a fusion of what they saw and heard.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
A symbolic representation born from observing nature and how their own minds processed it.
It's actually quite a beautiful idea, isn't it? Taking a simple letter and connecting it back to these like fundamental natural forces and how ancient people might have seen the world.
It is, but
And this is the big but we mentioned. What about the actual documented history of the letter Y? Because that tells a different story, doesn't it?
it absolutely does.
Yeah.
And the source is very, very clear about this. The known history, the linguistic lineage of Y, it's well established,
Hmm.
and it's a totally different path.
Okay, so what is that official path?
Well, its direct ancestor is the Greek letter upsilon, the or shape.
Right.
The Romans borrowed upsilon, mostly to write Greek words they were adopting. And then, over centuries, through various sound shifts and changes in writing, it eventually evolved into the Y we use in English, playing its different roles as a vowel or consonant.
So the history books trace it back to Greek upsilon.
Mhm.
Full stop. And in that official story, the fact that it looks like a river confluence is just coincidence.
Pretty much, yes. It's considered coincidental in standard historical etymology.
Okay.
So this river confluence theory, it's definitely not supported by the historical evidence for Y itself. It's more like a parallel idea, a speculative, symbolic reading.
But the source adds another really cool point here for context. It reminds us that even if this theory isn't proven for Y, lots of ancient letters did start out as pictures, right? As pictograms drawn from life.
Absolutely. That's a key piece of context. The article mentions the classic examples like Aleph, the first letter in many Semitic alphabets, coming from a symbol for an ox head, or Mem, which evolved from a symbol that represented water, often looking like waves.
So, okay, even if the Y from a river idea is speculative, the general principle of letter shapes coming from pictures of the natural world, that's totally real. That happened.
Oh, definitely. That process is a well-understood part of how many writing systems developed. So it makes this Y hypothesis, even if it's just speculation for this specific letter, feel less random. It fits into a known pattern of how symbols can be born.
Right. It shows that the kind of thinking behind the hypothesis looking for links between symbols and nature isn't completely out of left field in the history of writing.
Exactly. It just highlights that the concept is plausible even if the evidence for this particular case isn't there historically.
Okay. So let's try and wrap this up. We've been diving deep into this river confluence hypothesis for the letter Y. And it's presented, as the source says, not as like historical fact,
No.
but more as a compelling naturalistic metaphor.
Right. It's a theory that kind of pulls together threads from different places. You've got hydrology, the river shapes, a bit of physics maybe with the water sounds, cognitive science, how our brains work,
Yeah.
and these linguistic ideas like Odam Tilly about language starting in nature.
It doesn't rewrite the history books for Y,
No.
but it gives us this really imaginative way to think about connections, potential connections, maybe subconscious ones, between the symbols we use all the time and the natural world that, shaped how humans first started thinking and talking.
Yeah, it just encourages you to look again at familiar things like
Yeah.
letters and wonder, what deeper echoes might they carry, even if we don't consciously realize it.
So what's the takeaway for you listening? Maybe the next time you write down the letter Y or see it somewhere, you might just pause for a split second. And maybe you won't just think about the word it's in. Maybe, just maybe, you'll hear a tiny echo of water bubbling or picture two streams joining together.
Even if fleetingly.
Yeah.
It adds this layer of potential meaning, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Tied right back to our environment.
It does. And, that leaves us with a final thought for you to sort of chew on. If this fascinating, even if speculative idea suggests that a simple shape like Y could somehow hold echoes of rivers and nature sounds within our minds,
Yeah.
well, what other everyday shapes or sounds, things from the natural world all around us, might be subtly woven into our language, or into the symbols we use, or just into how we fundamentally perceive things?
Hmm. That's something to think about.
Definitely something for you to mull over. Keep an eye and an ear out for those hidden connections.